If you were to ask an F1 fan about what driver they thought had had a rather chaotic tenure in the sport, a fair number of them would probably point to Pastor Maldonado, which may not be too surprising given that there was a website dedicated to whenever he crashed. But the thing with Maldonado was that yes, whilst he did have his fair share of shunts, he actually did have a lot of raw talent. It just didn't show regularly enough. The inconsistency was a part of him that he sadly struggled to shrug off. Yet for me, there is one driver above anybody else who went on to have an F1 career that was defined by crashes. Not because he was a bad driver or that most of the crashes were his fault, but because he just couldn't seem to stop having really big accidents. Luciano Burti was born in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and after impressing in the British single-seater feeder series ladder, particularly the 1999 British F3 season, finishing second in the championship ahead of some driver called Jenson Button, Jackie Stewart was apparently keen for the Ford-owned Jaguar team to pick him as a test driver for 2000, which they duly did. Now, to be fair, a lot of Luciano's racing career up to this point had been with Paul Stewart's racing team, Jackie's son, so obviously the Stewarts got to know him well, and what his strengths and weaknesses were. In all respects though, Luciano seemed like a driver who had the ability to be a very decent Grand Prix driver. And he got his F1 debut earlier than he anticipated, subbing in for the unwell Eddie Irvine in Austria. Despite his lack of track time, he'd qualified 21st, and roughly 6/10 off teammate Johnny Herbert. He'd start from the pit lane, which, given the chaos of the start, was possibly a good thing, and he'd end up finishing in 11th, 2 laps down. However, with Johnny retiring from F1 at the end of the season, Burti would end up being promoted to a race seat at Jaguar for 2001, in what turned out to be a season of nightmares. And those nightmares started pretty quickly, as during qualifying for the first round in Australia, he would end up going hard into the barriers at the fast turn 5 due to a left rear suspension failure. Jaguar would find a fix for the issue that occurred, and Burti would start the race. A race in which he finished in 8th place, and also a race where we'd lose the life of track marshal Graham Beveridge. For the next round in Malaysia, Burti would finish in 10th without any major dramas, but his home race wouldn't go so well. After being not too far behind teammate Eddie Irvine in qualifying, he'd have to retire on lap 31 due to a water seal issue that could have caused the engine to expire. Burti was again not too far off Irvine during qualifying at Imola and would finish the race in 11th. So far, he seemed to be doing a decent job. However, it was already revealed that Burti wouldn't be racing for Jaguar in 2002. So instead of carrying on with the team for the rest of 2001, Burti immediately decided that he would jump ship to Prost from the next round in Spain and onwards. Burti said of the decision, "It was the best option to my future in F1. It was definitely the right thing to do, as I can now be in a team that gives me great prospects for the future." He'd replaced Gaston Mazzacane and made a decent impact immediately, qualifying an impressive 14th ahead of his experienced teammate John Alesi. 11th is where he'd finish in the race, and would also finish in that place in Austria too. But Monaco would once again spring a terrifying surprise for the Brazilian. In the first practice session, Burti's brakes stopped functioning coming into Saint Devote, which meant he would suffer a huge frontal impact with the tyre wall and come uncomfortably close to a recovery vehicle. Thankfully, neither he, or anybody else for that matter, were hurt. His race would end far less dramatically at the same corner, as his reverse gear didn't work when he overshot Saint Devote. After an 8th in Canada, a 12th at the Nürburgring, a 10th in France, and a retirement through an engine issue in the UK, everything seemed to completely fall apart from Germany onwards. Despite a crash in qualifying, Burti would start in 16th, but further up, Michael Schumacher had a gear selection gremlin that slowed him right down at the start. Whilst the rest of the field charged up behind him, he would be collected by the unsighted and rather unfortunate Luciano Burti, sending the Prost skywards, landing upside down before coming back the correct way up, bouncing into the gravel. Yet again, a huge accident for Luciano that brought out the red flag. But remarkably, not only was he and every other driver okay from the incident, he would be restarting the race, because remember this was back in the days of the spare car. Now, whilst he was physically able to race, perhaps mentally he quite understandably may not have been quite with it. Burti would retire ironically enough at the same corner in less dramatic circumstances, crashing at turn 1, ending a frankly awful weekend. The struggles though continued in Hungary, over a second off new teammate Heinz-Harald Frentzen, apparently due to an unbalanced race car. And he'd spin off in the race, and would DNF. He certainly hoped he could end this string of results at a spectacular Spa circuit. But it was not to be. After qualifying 18th, Burti was trying to get up the order, but coming into Blanchimont on lap 5, he and his former Jaguar teammate Eddie Irvine would make contact, removing the front wing of the Prost and sending both hard into the tyre barrier, with Burti in particular having an enormous 150 mph frontal impact. Yet, despite the massive shunt, Burti would remarkably escape the accident with not too many injuries, facial bruising and a serious concussion. It was one of those crashes that make you wince the first time you see it, an impact that was 111 G, and was severe enough to break the front of his crash helmet. But at least he would be able to make a full recovery from it, albeit this would be the last time we'd see of Burti in an F1 race, as he was replaced by Thomas Enger after Belgium, and the Prost team wouldn't compete in 2002 onwards. He would subsequently become a test driver for Ferrari and then BMW Williams afterwards, but wouldn't get back into an F1 race seat. He would then spend most of the rest of his career in his home nation of Brazil in the Stock Car Brazil series. In the end, this was a brief yet very dramatic F1 career, for a driver who perhaps wasn't going to break records, but was certainly much better than his results show, or indeed the several huge accidents that plagued his career. And the thing was, nearly all of those shunts were down to factors of where he had very limited control. Mechanical failure in Australia, mechanical failure in Monaco, and utterly powerless in Germany. The accident at Spa is the only one where you could argue that he played a potential part in that crash. He never really had a long enough tenure without misfortune befalling him to prove how good he was. It would certainly have been interesting to see what this guy could have done in better machinery, and perhaps more importantly, with better luck. But that though is going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. I'm intrigued to know what you think of Luciano's F1 career, so say in the comment section down below. Also, if you did enjoy this video, then I'd be enormously appreciative if you did hit the like and subscribe buttons. With that being said, however, until the next video, be kind to each other and enjoy the rest of your day.